everyone. My name is Nasia Hadjigeorgiou, and I am an assistant professor in transitional justice and human rights at UCLan Cyprus. What I will be talking to you about today is a module on the LLM called Peacebuilding and the Law. So what we will do is I will briefly take you through the learning outcomes of the module, and then I will explain what we actually cover in the module in the form of an example on the Committee on Missing Persons in Cyprus. So the module has 5 learning outcomes. The first learning outcome is that students will understand and critically assess the liberal peacebuilding agenda. By liberal peacebuilding agenda, we mean the tools and strategies that are being used in order to promote peace in societies that have emerged from conflict, from violence. After we have understood the tools that are being used in a liberal peacebuilding agenda, we will identify and explain the possible contributions that human rights make to the peacebuilding of peace. We will try to assess whether these contributions are positive, are negative, or whether they are in fact non-existent. The second learning outcome is that we will try to critically evaluate relevant case law in post-conflict countries. In other words, we will think about the legal issues that exist in post-conflict situations, like in Bosnia and Herzegovina, like in Cyprus, like in South Africa, like in Israel and Palestine, like in Ukraine. So we will identify the legal issues that exist in these contexts, and we will understand how case law has contributed to the resolution of these issues. The third learning outcome is that students will be able to assess the contributions of international and regional courts in building peace. In other words, having identified the legal issues that exist in post-conflict countries, we will take it a step further and we will try to understand what happens if these legal issues actually reach court. Are courts likely to contribute to peace building? Are they likely to have a positive effect or no? The fourth learning outcome is that students will be able to critically analyze the law's contribution as a peace building tool and the potential use of alternative approaches. In other words, we will start asking the question, is law actually a good strategy, a good tool in building peace, or should we be focusing on other things like psychology or sociology or political science? And finally, like with all LLM modules, students will have the opportunity to research, critically evaluate, and present well-structured arguments, both in writing and orally. So with these objectives in mind, let's try and use the Committee on Missing Persons in Cyprus as an example of the type of discussions that we will be having in this module called Peacebuilding and the Law. So the Committee on Missing Persons in Cyprus, or the short acronym for this is the CMP, is a body that is bicommunal in its nature. Now, what does that mean? It means that unlike other bodies on the island, unlike other bodies in Cyprus, it is staffed and headed by members of both communities of the island, by both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. This is unique because of the absence of a comprehensive peace settlement in the country. The two communities do not recognize each other as legitimate and do not cooperate with each other, which means that this institution, which is based on the collaboration of the two communities, is exceptional. Now, what does the CMP do? Its mandate, in other words, its job description, is to locate, identify, and return those who were missing as a result of the conflict on the island, which the mandate itself says that the conflict took place between 1963 and 1974. As a matter of practice, the people who went missing between 1963 and 1974 are not just disappeared, they are also in 100% of the cases, at least so far, deceased. So when the CMP locates, identifies, and returns those who went missing, what we actually mean in practice is the return of the remains of those who went missing so that they can be properly buried by their relatives. The committee does not have the power to investigate alleged crimes or start prosecutions against alleged perpetrators. What that means is that the mandate of the committee to locate, identify, and return the remains of those who went missing is the only thing the committee can do. If it has unearthed information about a crime that has taken place during the disappearance, for example, murder, it's not allowed to use that information in any way. It's not allowed to start an investigation. It's not allowed to start a prosecution. The other thing that the CMP is not allowed to do is to declare a cause of death. In other words, even if it is blatantly obvious how a person died, the CMP is not allowed to reach that conclusion when giving the remains of that person to their families. Just to be clear about what that means, in the majority of cases where disappeared persons are identified, it's very obvious that they were executed and that their deaths were not accidental. So that is obvious through a number of factors. For example, they were either found in mass graves, or they were found shot in the head or in the neck, or in the head, the neck, and the knees. These are indications that their deaths were planned. Even in the presence of such compelling evidence, however, the CMP is not allowed to reach the conclusion that this death was a planned one. Now, with this background in mind, what remains to be seen is whether the CMP is doing its job properly, whether it is an effective institution. In order to assess the effectiveness of the CMP, one must be clear about its objectives. The CMP has two stated objectives. The first is that it is intended, it is designed, it operates with the objective of bringing closure to the victims of the families. The consensus among the families of missing persons is that because they are unable to bury their loved ones, because they don't know whether their loved ones are alive or dead, they are suffering from what has been called ambiguous loss. They cannot start mourning their loved one, but at the same time, they cannot move on. So they are in this limbo state, which makes it impossible to start rebuilding their lives. The first objective of the CMP is to stop this limbo state, to bring closure to the victims of the families so that they can start reliving. The second objective of the CMP is to promote reconciliation and a comprehensive peace settlement between the two communities on the island, in other words, between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. So starting with the first objective, has the CMP promoted closure? Well, in a series of interviews with relatives of missing persons carried out in 2020, the answers to this question were fairly mixed. So many stated that yes, the return of their relatives' remains was instrumental in promoting closure. The relatives felt that they had achieved closure primarily because of two reasons. The first one was that many relatives felt a sense of relief because they finally felt that they had done what was expected of them for their relative. In other words, they finally buried him. They gave him a proper burial. The second reason is that with the burial, a grave was created, which now gives them a place to visit, a place to go when they want to think about their relative on special days, on religious holidays, and so on and so forth. So many relatives did feel that the CMP's return of the remains did promote closure. This was the case for those who have already received the remains of their loved ones. So to put some numbers into the picture, there are approximately 2,000 missing persons in Cyprus, and about half of them have received back the remains. The other half are still waiting. Of those half who have received the remains, many, although not all, were happy with the extent to which the CMP promoted closure among their families. However, there were also many complaints about the way the CMP operates, even from those who were overall satisfied with the CMP's proceedings. So 3 complaints were made with regards to how the CMP operates. The first complaint had to do with the massive delays that characterize the committee's actions. To make this clear, the CMP was established in 1981, but it only exhumed its first body. It only returned the first body to the missing person's family in 2006, some 25 years after it became operational. In these 25 years, witnesses died, relatives died, memories faded, and large infrastructure projects were built on top of burial sites. That means that because of the delays, it is today impossible to locate all of the missing. Some people will never get closure. The second complaint is the lack of transparency in how the committee operates. There is a very serious amount of uncertainty as to how the committee chooses who to look for and who not to look for, how it looks for these people, what kind of information they are relying on, what they have done with that information in terms of exhausting the ways in which they could have utilized pieces of evidence that they received. There is a lack of clarity in terms of how quickly things are moving or how slowly things are moving. And in general, the relatives are left in the dark about their own case's investigation until the day they are actually contacted by the CMP out of the blue to be told that their relative has been found. The last complaint that has been made in terms of promoting closure is that the relatives were often expecting something more than what the CMP provided. They were expecting a story of what happened to their loved one. They were expecting an explanation for why their loved one disappeared and was killed. They were expecting some more detail about how the death took place, or whether torture or rape had taken place before the death. None of this information is made available. Others were expecting prosecutions. They were expecting someone to pay for the harm that the relative has suffered and for the harm that the family has suffered. Again, these were not forthcoming. If I can put it crudely, the only thing that the families received is a box of bones. And don't get me wrong, that box of bones is important. It has hugely beneficial consequences for the relatives. But many made it very clear that, important as it wasn't enough. So, even though the question, has the CMP promote closure, has received a mixed answer, the question, has the CMP promoted reconciliation, has a lot less mixed responses. The consensus, it's almost unanimous. The relatives are almost unanimous in their answer. The consensus is that the CMP has not been a successful peace-building institution. The CMP and the United Nations have often claimed that an important objective of the committee is to promote reconciliation, is to encourage a comprehensive peace settlement. This is stated time and again, but in practice, no steps have actually been taken in that direction. There doesn't appear to exist any willingness on behalf of the CMP to promote reconciliation. Now, why is this? There are two possible reasons for that. The first is that reconciliation was not within the CMP's mandate from the very beginning. Reconciliation only became an objective of the committee later. When the committee was first established, it only had one objective: to promote closure. Over time, that objective developed into the promotion of reconciliation, but the tools that the CMP was given did not change. So, although it was given the tools to promote closure, the introduction of a second objective to promote reconciliation was not followed by the necessary tools in order to achieve that as well. Now, the second reason why the CMP has been a failure in promoting reconciliation is that there is a lack of trust between the members of the committee itself. And that is unsurprising. Despite the CMP being a bicommunal institution, one should not forget that Cyprus does not have a comprehensive peace settlement. So what we have are Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots who are responsible for heading a bicommunal institution, but their political bosses and everyone else around them operates as if that cooperation is non-existent. There is no trust between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots in general. It would be perhaps naively optimistic to accept that there is trust in this bubble that we call the Committee of Missing Persons. So that raises more general questions, which will remain unanswered for the purposes of this taster session at least, as to whether you can ever promote reconciliation from the bottom up. In other words, through an institution that was established by political leaders in the absence of a comprehensive peace settlement, or whether the only way you can have reconciliation is if you start building it from the grassroots up. So, what are the lessons learned about the CMP? The first important lesson that connects to the promotion of closure is that even today, the transparency in the CMP's procedures must be improved. The CMP should contact relatives that are still waiting for remains and should give them an update on what is happening with investigations in their particular cases. And these updates must be regular. The second lesson is that the CMP, and this one has to do with the promotion of reconciliation, is that the CMP should adopt explicitly reconciliatory activities. In other words, if it wants to promote reconciliation, to state the obvious, it must do things that actually promote reconciliation. It should not just market itself as a reconciliatory body. It should actually take action in that direction. It should organize common events between Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot relatives of missing persons. And in cases where there is a one-sided account of history, it should refute that one-sided account. It should, for example, make it clear that through its investigations, there were both Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot perpetrators and both Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot victims. If it does not take such steps, and if it does not want to take such steps, the CMP should consider continuing doing only what it does best. In other words, it should consider whether it would be a good idea to stop claiming that it promotes reconciliation and focus on the narrower objective of just promoting closure. The final thing that I want to say is that over the years, the CMP has been used as an example by other post-conflict societies. So a very similar institution to the CMP has been established in Lebanon. There have been experts from Iraq, there have been experts from Sri Lanka that have arrived in Cyprus and have used the CMP as a model of good practice. It is important that these institutions take a very critical and close look at what the CMP has done well and what it has not done well, so that the lessons learned in Cyprus can be applied elsewhere as well. Now, the last thing that I want to say before concluding is that the information that I discussed on the CMP in this video was the result of a research project that was funded by IPRA Foundation. You can find out more about the project and more about the researchers' conclusions by looking at this, by watching a 5-minute video called the Committee on Missing Persons in Cyprus, the Relatives Assessment. The link for that is available in the slides. Thank you very much.